It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Hey, I know this audience. I know it's a very intelligent audience. I know you guys know a lot. And, you probably know a lot more than the average person when it comes to the events surrounding the founding of this country, whether it be the founding fathers, whether it be the framers of the Constitution. But we still don't know everything that we should. Matter of fact, there's so much history surrounding it. I think you could spend a lifetime studying it and still discover new things, new truths about the men who came together and risked their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor in order to establish this country. And so that's why this book, it's a book called George Mason, the founding father who gave us the Bill of Rights, is so interesting, and it's something you need to check out. The author of the book is William G. Hyland, Jr., and he joins us on the phone right now. Mr. Hyland, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let me just start with why you decided to write this book about George Mason. What's so important about George? I mean, you don't hear about George Mason that often.
Well, he's really one of the lost founding fathers. And the more I researched him, the more I found that he is probably one of the most important figures in U.S. history. One of the interesting things about Mason is that he actually coined the term life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Wow.
And he wrote those words about a month before Jefferson penned his Declaration of Independence. And Jefferson basically borrowed a lot of his language and used those terms in his declaration.
Wow. I didn't know that at all. I'd never heard that before. Why do you think why do you think it all gets just kind of I mean, obviously Jefferson's the author, but George Mason, I mean, I'm here, the Declaration of Independence was not Jefferson's original idea. He adapted it directly from Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights.
He did. He borrowed it heavily, and it was written about a month before the July 4th Declaration. But Mason is more important, I think, for really the father of the Bill of Rights. Madison gets credit for it, but it was Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was written in 1776 that basically formed the blueprint for our first 10 amendments. For example, he wrote the freedom of the press, freedom of religion. He actually wrote the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. And this was all 12 years before the Constitutional Convention.
Wow.
In 1787.
Yeah, and I've often heard this, and by the way, we're talking with William G. Hyland, Jr. He's author of the book George Mason, the founding father who gave us the Bill of Rights. I've often heard that, there were some that didn't want the Bill of Rights in the Constitution because they thought the Constitution itself was clear about enumerated power. So obviously we don't even need the Bill of Rights because, yeah, we have those. Those are inerrant. Those are just, they're man's default.
Well, you're correct. Washington and Madison thought that a Bill of Rights was superfluous. And that's the interesting thing about George Mason. He was one of three men who did not sign the Constitution because it did not contain a Declaration of Rights or a Bill of Rights. And it was really he and Patrick Henry in the Virginia Convention that got the Bill of Rights attached to the Constitution. And actually, he should be given credit for the Bill of Rights. But it was Madison and Washington who were against the Bill of Rights at the convention.
And, obviously, I think I'm glad it worked out with a specific list of rights, just because I think it's helped us maintain more of our freedom in the long term. But I think it's fascinating that was an argument that was had, because it shows you how serious these men took the idea. It seems like they would both agree that government has a tendency to grow because a government is made up of men, and men are going to try to use that government to take the liberties away in some form of their fellow man. Okay, so you have one side that says, well, the Constitution itself, this is it. This is going to protect man's liberty and their God-given rights. And then you say, no, we need to go a step further, because there's going to be inevitably this growth, and they're going to try to come after. They're going to try to do more than what we've prescribed that they're going to do. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And that was Mason's clarion call. He believed in individual rights, individual liberty, and he was much, much afraid that the federal government was going to have too much power. And that was one of the reasons he did not sign the Constitution. Both he and Jefferson were anti-federalists. They believed in individual rights, individual liberty, and they thought that too much power was concentrated in the federal government in the Constitution, and that's one of the reasons he did not sign the Constitution.
Wow. So talk about God-given rights. That was in the original, some of the original drafts of the Declaration, right?
Yes, it was, and Mason was a very deeply religious and Christian man. In fact, he thought that these natural rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, were God-given to every man, not given by the government, but natural rights given by God, by the Creator.
I think a lot of our, from what I can tell, and I love, Jefferson, and I love, some of these other guys, you hear about, Benjamin Franklin. It seems, though, that our culture seems to promote now the least religious of the founding fathers and framers. Do you notice that?
Yeah, I really agree with you. Really, religion has been taken out of our schools, really out of society. But these men, these founders, were deeply religious people. They were deeply religious men, and they really believed that these rights were God-given by the Creator.
Yeah, and yeah, certainly, I think we've. That's becoming harder and harder to say. Even in public, we're talking with. William G. Hyland Jr. Well, let me not say not harder, but less acceptable. And he is author of the book, again, George Mason, the founding father who gave us the Bill of Rights. And so let me ask you this, William. Have you been a student of history for a long time?
I have. This is my fourth book. My first book was on Thomas Jefferson and the controversy on whether Jefferson had an affair with his slave, Sally Hemings, and I really debunked that myth. But the more I researched Jefferson, I found that George Mason was one of his mentors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, okay, so one area of study leads you to the other and the other. And so that's kind of what I was saying at the beginning here. It's not inexhaustible, but it's pretty close to being inexhaustible when you're trying to look at, the formation of this country. There's just so much history there.
There's so much history, and these men were just fascinating. They say that the World War II generation was the greatest generation, and I don't want to take anything away from that, but these men really were the greatest generation. They were smart, they were prescient, and the Constitution is a living document that lives 250 years in the present and in the future.
Mm. Now, when you say, let me explore this, because at least in the politics of today, if you say the Constitution's a living document, that is somehow used to say that it's changing, right? Whereas it's funny because I grew up, I'm a Christian, and I've heard all my life that the Bible's a living document, but that actually means the opposite. It means that man is essentially the same at heart, and the Bible's truths, continue to say the same thing. You know what I mean? So when you say living, you just mean it's still the law of the land today, right?
It's the law of the land today, and it's subject to different interpretation. But I think most of the judges look at the original intent of the Founding Fathers, and that's what courts should look at. One of Mason's major contributions to our federal government is the separation of powers. He believed in a judiciary, an executive, and a legislative, and all three were equal branches of government, a check and balance on each other.
Do you think right now, I mean, obviously the country has grown in terms of the size of the government far beyond what the Constitution originally prescribed. So, I mean, there are many that say that, hey, look, we've got a lot of work to do if we ever want to rein that back in. And I know, we're talking about your book, but I'm just curious, as a student of history, have you thought about what we should do, if anything, right now? Like, is there a few things that we could do in an attempt to try to rein in, the growth of government, the power of the federal government at this point?
One of Mason's famous quotes that was, all power is vested in and derived from the people. And I think if he were alive today, he would definitely want to see more power given back to the states to make individual rights, individual liberties, individual decisions, less power in the federal government. And I think maybe he would be in favor of some of these regulations that Trump has been trying to cut through for federal bureaucracy. So he was big into individual rights and giving more power back to the states and not to the federal government.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you. And I think there's more and more people that is their answer. I was listening to, I was listening to another radio host named Chris Ann Hall. She was talking about this word, delegate, and how it means it's a temporary delegation of power. The states temporary delegate, power to the federal government. And yet now we have the courts that have interpreted the word delegate to mean surrender the power. And, I just thought that's interesting, because that's not even what the actual dictionary version of the word delegate means. And but yet here we are, and I agree with you 100%. The states have they've got a huge role to play. If it wasn't for the states, we wouldn't have even had the Constitution.
Oh, absolutely. And one of Mason's famous quotes in his Virginia Declaration of Rights is that government is and ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people. So he believed that government was formed for the benefit of the people, not vice versa. And he was big into individual liberty, individual rights, and states' rights over the federal government.
Yeah. Well, the book is George Mason, the founding father who gave us the Bill of Rights. Again, that is, among history people, I'm assuming, William, is controversial, because, a lot of times Madison is going to get the credit for that. And you're saying, hey, no, look, it's George Mason. We need to look into this guy. And William G. Hyland, Jr., author of this great book. I appreciate you coming on the program, and I encourage people to go out and get it on Amazon or your local store. And I appreciate you working on this book, William.
Thanks for your time.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. William G. Hyland, Jr., everyone. Again, the book, George Mason, the founding father who gave us the Bill of Rights.